Welcome to episode 30 of the Perrysburg Podcast. I'm your host and Perrysburg resident, Kim Newlove. Today, we're talking about places of worship in Perrysburg. If you're new to this podcast, welcome. The Perrysburg Podcast is an informational podcast for prospective, new, and current Perrysburg, Ohio residents. We talk about what's in Perrysburg and why people like to live here. You can find the show notes for this episode on perrysburgpodcast.com. When I released episode 2 of the Perrysburg Podcast back in August of 2023, I mentioned a dozen topics that I wanted to cover. Places of worship was among them. I'm finally getting around to releasing this episode. Why would I pick this topic, though? Religion can be kind of controversial. It's because in this digital day and age, places of worship are still one of those places where many people like to gather in person once a week, typically on Sunday mornings here in Perrysburg. Because there are so many places of worship in Perrysburg, there's more than a dozen, this episode will simply introduce the topic. Then I'll be sprinkling in episodes from each individual place of worship throughout the podcast as time goes on. If you're familiar with the Perrysburg Podcast, the podcast that you're listening to right now, my plan for talking about places of worship is similar to the pattern that I chose for talking about parks in Perrysburg. Episode 7 introduced a list of parks in Perrysburg. Then episodes 10, 15, and 25 were about individual parks. Specifically, I have talked about Woodlands Park, Hood Park, and W.W. Knight Nature Preserve, in that order. I'll put the links to those episodes in the show notes so you can have them for easy reference. I'm not done talking about parks yet, so I'll continue to sprinkle more episodes about parks in this podcast over time. With the walleye run coming up for the fishermen any day now, the next 3 parks are Buttonwood Park, which will be next week, February 23rd, the Davis Overlook in March, and the Riverwalk in April. All of them are right on the river, and because the walleye run involves the Maumee River, this is a great time to talk about those parks. Now, Riverside Park, of course, is also on the river, but I will be talking about that park in May. There is a good reason for that. Memorial Day is in May, and it's a good time to talk about Riverside Park because we have a new Gold Star Families Memorial that was dedicated there in December in Riverside Park. So I'm going to connect the whole Memorial Day holiday with the Gold Star Families Memorial and publish that episode about Riverside Park in May. If you want to learn more about the production schedule for the Perrysburg Podcast, including what else is coming up in 2024, head over to perrysburgpodcast.com and sign up for the newsletter. Next month, which is March of 2024, I'll be starting a weekly newsletter for this podcast. If all goes according to plan, the first one will come out on Thursday, March 7th. Sign up today. Back to places of worship in Perrysburg. If you are a leader at your place of worship or you can put me in touch with one, please email me. The email address for this podcast is perrysburgpodcast@gmail.com. Again, that's perrysburgpodcast@gmail.com. You can find that in the episode description on your podcast player for episode 30, that's this episode, or you can go to the show notes on perrysburgpodcast.com. Who is first on my list? Lutheran Church of the Master on Simmons Road is up first. That's my church. Who's next? I don't know. I'm looking for the next few to add to my production schedule. All right, now I'll make a few general statements about places of worship in Perrysburg, and then we'll wrap this episode up. 2 topics come to mind: classification and activities. Which places of worship are in Perrysburg and which ones are not, and what happens there. Like I said, classification and activities. Let's dive in. If you're a local, you probably know that Christianity is the main religion in Perrysburg, but Perrysburg is also home to the Islamic Center of Greater Toledo. We have no Jewish temples or Hindu temples in Perrysburg that I know of, but I look forward to uncovering what else is in Perrysburg and not in Perrysburg. I don't know everything. We're on this journey together. On this podcast, We talk about what's in Perrysburg and why people like to live here. Finding your church family, as I call it, it can really help make your town feel more like a home. So, places of worship are a reason that people like to live here. We'll definitely talk about as many as I can find. At this time, I'd like to share a list of 14 types of places of worship that I know about here in Perrysburg. It's a somewhat alphabetical list. I love me a good list. Number 1, Alliance Church. Number 2, Assembly of God. Number 3, Baptist. Number 4, Catholic. Number 5, Christian Science Reading Room. I'm guessing that's Scientology, but I've never been in there. It's right next to Nedley's Ice Cream Shop. I'm going to check it out. I'll report back to you. Number 6, there's a church inside the YMCA. It's called Covenant Church. 7, Episcopal. 8, the Islamic Center of Greater Toledo. 9, Latter-day Saints. 10, Lutheran. We have both Missouri Synod and ELCA. If you're Lutheran, you know what that means. Number 11, Mega Church. I'm talking about Cedar Creek. Number 12, Methodist. We have at least 2. Number 13, Presbyterian. We have at least 2 of those as well. And 14, unclassified churches. 2 examples are Oak Bend Church and Hope in Church of Christ on Simmons Road near Bass Pro. I am unfamiliar with both of those churches. I'm sure they're both Christian churches, but until I have an interview with their leaders, I don't really know the basis of their faith. Is it like Lutheran, Presbyterian, Methodist? Is it its own thing? This podcast gives me an opportunity to find out. Now, I'm going to list 3 types of churches that are outside our zip code, which is 43551. Number 1, there are 3 synagogues in the Toledo area. 2, there is a Hindu temple in Sylvania. And 3, the nearest Kingdom Hall of Jehovah's Witnesses is either in Toledo or Northwood. Depending on where you live in the burg, one may be closer than the other. That ends the lists of types of places of worship in and around Perrysburg. At this time, I'd like to share a story with you. Back in 2018, I created a list of churches in Wood County for the Wood County Opiate Task Force. Everything that you just heard about was on that list. If I missed your place of worship, let me know via email. I would like to add it. After 6 years, I truly do need to update the list of churches in Perrysburg, and I could use your help. Again, perrysburgpodcast@gmail.com is the email address. If you're wondering why I created a list of churches in Wood County in 2018 and what's the Wood County Opiate Task Force, here's the backstory. Real quick, in case you're new to the podcast, I am a pharmacist by training, but I am not in clinical practice anymore. No, nothing bad happened to my license. I am raising an individual with a disability, and my available work hours and the work hours of most pharmacist jobs do not jive, so I do something else. I am a voice actor and a podcast host. Think medical narrator. All right. Back in the day, though, I worked at Arrowhead Behavioral Health in Maumee as a relief pharmacist. I covered weekends for my friend in 2015 and 2016. Prior to that, I worked for Walgreens, St. Luke's, and a couple of other different companies. Now, if you're unfamiliar with Arrowhead Behavioral Health, it is a small behavioral health hospital that treats substance use disorders like alcoholism, opioid addiction, benzodiazepine addiction, and so on. And they also treat mental health disorders like bipolar disorder, among other diagnoses. I saw some things at Arrowhead in the substance abuse realm that I just did not understand, like a lot of opioid addiction among white males in their 20s. I did not understand that, so I got curious, and I joined a group in Bowling Green called the Wood County Opiate Task Force so I could learn more. The Wood County Adamus Board and the Wood County Prevention Coalition led what is now called the Wood County Addiction Task Force. It used to be called the Wood County Opiate Task Force. Now, in case you have more questions, who belongs to this group? It's a number of people. The prevention specialists that are in our schools here in Wood County, the sheriff's office, healthcare providers such as myself, social workers, grandparents raising grandchildren, and more. If you want to know more, Google that or email me. The name again is the Wood County Addiction Task Force. While I was there from 2017 until the pandemic started in 2020, I learned a lot. Mission accomplished. I had questions, I was curious, and I found answers. And during my time with the Wood County Opiate Task Force, I realized that sometimes people turn to their pastor when they're struggling with something, and they need to get connected to services now. You have to strike when the iron's hot. When somebody's ready, you have to know where to go. An acquaintance of mine from the task force, his name is Pastor Jeffrey Bischoff, helped me to understand the impact that leaders from places of worship can make on people who have an addiction disorder or need some help. He was a really big advocate of two things, come to think of it. One was fighting stigma, and the other was providing resources. I really appreciated his message, all the clarity he helped me find, and together with the members of the Wood County Opiate Task Force, we created some faith community discussions about addiction in Wood County, opioid addiction, and other addiction disorders. Reaching out to churches was my job, hence the list. I created a list of all of the churches in Wood County in 2018 so I could help get the word out about the faith community discussions about addiction. Long story, I know, but now you know. And if you'd like to learn more about those events, even though they were 5-6 years ago, I believe that the Perrysburg Messenger Journal archives have some information about them. And you can Google it or you can reach out to me, perrysburgpodcast@gmail.com. Now back to your regularly scheduled programming about places of worship in Perrysburg. Even though I am a member of a church here in Perrysburg, again, it's Lutheran Church of the Master on Simmons Road, I feel like somebody in my family or I has been in just about every church in this town for something or the other. So in somewhat alphabetical order, here are some reasons that people gather at churches here in Perrysburg. AA, baby showers, baptisms, basketball practice, Bible study, baton twirling class, Boy Scout meetings and the Pinewood Derby, bridal showers, choir practice, Christmas parties, clothing ministries, confirmation classes and the confirmation ceremony, driver's education, festivals. A great example is the International Festival at the Islamic Center of Greater Toledo. I plan to go to that this year in September or October, whenever it is. It is a family-friendly cultural and food event with music, dancing, tours of the mosque, and more. Also at places of worship in Perrysburg, you will find food pantries, funerals, Girl Scout meetings, graduation parties, marriage counseling, meetings and special programs of all kinds like Weight Watchers or the faith community discussion about opioid addiction, mission trip preparation and organizing, preschool, rummage sales, Sunday school, vacation Bible school in the summer. One of the churches, First United Methodist Church on 2nd Street, always had snow cones. They were awesome. Churches also have youth group, weddings, and last but certainly not least, worship services. I hope that gives you an idea of which places of worship are in Perrysburg, which denominations, and why they are one of the many reasons that people in Perrysburg like to live here. This has been episode 30 of the Perrysburg Podcast. Please visit perrysburgpodcast.com to read the show notes. In the show notes, you'll find links to previous episodes of the Perrysburg Podcast, which were mentioned earlier, the ones about parks, a link to Lutheran Church of the Master, my email address, and more. If you know someone who might like this episode so they can learn about places of worship in Perrysburg or sign up for the newsletter, please share this episode with them. And if you like this podcast, please subscribe to or follow the Perrysburg Podcast on your favorite podcast player and YouTube to get each new episode right when it comes out. Thanks for listening today. I'll be back next Friday to talk about Buttonwood Park and the Walleye Run. Have a great weekend, maybe do some fishing, and if you want to visit Lutheran Church of the Master at 28744 Simmons Road in Perrysburg, stop by on Sunday at 9 a.m. or watch our live stream on Facebook. Thanks again for listening. Take care.